Dust and destiny. The shriek of metal grinding against metal sliced through the afternoon quiet as the train lurched to a stop, kicking up a cloud of fine earth that briefly swallowed redemption. Sarah squeezed Daisy's hand, the little palm slick in hers. Violet, clutching her threadbare doll, remained glued to Sarah's side, her eyes wide, mirroring the motes dancing in the sun-baked air. Stepping off the train, Sarah felt the arid heat envelop her, a stifling blanket. The sun hammered down, bleaching the storefronts lining Main Street to faded ghosts of their former selves. Redemption was smaller, more forlorn than she had pictured. A knot of figures stood on the boardwalk, their faces hidden beneath hat brims, observing the train's arrival with a watchful stillness. Daisy, ever inquisitive, tugged at Sarah's skirt. "Mama, horsies?" Her gaze led Sarah to a hitching rail where a few horses stood, flicking their tails against the incessant flies. A magnificent ebony stallion stood apart, saddled yet untended, its coat gleaming even in the brutal light. Clutching her worn carpetbag, Sarah watched as a man peeled away from the group on the boardwalk. Tall, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his faded denim jacket, he moved with a slow, measured stride, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat. "Caleb." He halted a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over Sarah before settling on the twins. His eyes, the color of a storm-bruised sky, widened almost imperceptibly. He swallowed hard, his jaw tight. "Sarah?" The word rasped like gravel tumbling downhill. "Caleb," she replied, her voice betraying nothing of the turmoil within. She straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "We finally meet." He didn't answer, his focus locked on Daisy and Violet. Sensing the undercurrent, the twins huddled closer to Sarah, seeking her comfort. Daisy, however, couldn't suppress her curiosity. She tilted her head, studying Caleb. "Are you our new papa?" The question hung in the air, heavy and expectant. The color drained from Caleb's face beneath his tan. He looked from Daisy to Violet, then back to Sarah, his gaze a silent plea. Sarah drew a steadying breath. "Caleb, these are my daughters, Daisy and Violet." Silence descended, broken only by the distant cry of a crow and the groan of a weathered sign swinging in the breeze. Caleb remained motionless, his expression an enigma. Sarah couldn't decipher if he was angry, stunned, or simply overwhelmed. The townsfolk shifted on the boardwalk, their whispers growing louder. Mrs. Henderson, the town's resident busybody, fluttered her handkerchief, her eyes darting between Sarah, Caleb, and the girls. Old Man Hemlock, silent for years, leaned forward, his gnarled hand gripping his cane tighter. Then Caleb broke. He sank to his knees, dust swirling around him like a shroud. He reached out, his hand trembling, and gently brushed Violet's cheek. Her eyes, mirroring his stormy blue, widened in surprise. "Their eyes," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Daisy, then back at Violet, his gaze drawn to the distinctive birthmark above Violet's left eyebrow, a tiny, ivory crescent. A mark seared into his memory. He lifted his gaze to Sarah, his eyes flooded with disbelief and a burgeoning realization. "How?" Kneeling beside him, Sarah spoke softly. "They're yours, Caleb." He seemed to deflate, the air rushing from his lungs. He closed his eyes for a moment, his face a mask of pain and fragile hope. When he opened them, his gaze centered on the twins, a flicker of tenderness softening his harsh features. "Daisy," he breathed, his voice raw. "Violet." He repeated their names as if testing their weight on his tongue. Emboldened by his gentle tone, Daisy stepped forward, offering a shy smile. "Hello," she whispered. Violet, still clutching her doll, remained cautious but didn't flinch from his touch. The boardwalk buzzed with conjecture. The unexpected arrival of twins, and Caleb's stunned reaction, was a spectacle Redemption hadn't witnessed in ages. Sarah watched Caleb, her pulse hammering in her throat. She had taken a chance, a desperate plunge, unsure of the outcome. She saw the raw emotion in his eyes, the initial shock giving way to recognition. He was a man grappling with his past, with sorrow and regret. Could he embrace the future, embrace these children who were inextricably linked to him? Caleb looked up at Sarah, his eyes seeking hers. I don't understand," he stammered, bewildered. "There's a story," Sarah said, her voice calm and grounding. "But first, let's get out of this heat." He nodded slowly, still reeling. He rose, his gaze never leaving the twins. He extended a hand to Daisy, who readily accepted it. Then, he offered his other hand to Violet, who hesitated before placing her small hand in his. Together, they walked toward the ebony stallion, the horse nudging Caleb's shoulder in greeting. The townsfolk watched in hushed awe as the improbable family moved down the street, leaving behind only swirling dust and the weight of unspoken questions. Dust that spoke of the here and now, and the destiny that awaited them all. Echoes of Lily, a whisper of lavender, Lily's signature, brushed against Caleb's senses. He gripped the porch railing, the wood rough beneath his fingers. Years had passed since he'd inhaled that particular fragrance with such clarity, a scent inextricably linked to her memory. Then he saw Violet down on the step, absorbed in arranging her collection of stones. More than just the perfume, it was the way the sunlight gilded her hair, the gentle slope of her cheek, that struck him with a sickening lurch. A trick of the light, surely, but one that quickly resolved into a haunting echo. Lily. He recoiled, the porch boards groaning beneath his boots. The same wide, innocent gaze, that unmistakable shade of verdant green, each iris flecked with gold. His Lily's eyes, staring back at him from a child's face he had only just met. Caleb dragged a hand across his jaw, the rasp of stubble doing little to ground him. It had to be a phantom, a cruel jest played by a mind weary with loss. Grief, he knew intimately, could warp perception. Yet, this felt different, not a subtle suggestion, but a deafening roar in the silence of his heart. He recalled Lily guiding him through a clumsy waltz in the barn, her carefree laughter as she stumbled. He remembered her humming amidst her roses, her fingertips stained with earth and the occasional thorn. He recalled their hands meeting, rough skin against rough skin, a wordless commitment passing between them. And the crushing void that had followed her absence. He flicked his gaze toward Sarah, who was attempting to get Daisy to eat a slice of apple. Their eyes met, and he saw a question there. He averted his gaze, unable to voice the inner pandemonium. How could he explain that beholding his deceased wife's eyes in his daughter's face felt simultaneously like a divine gift and a profound violation? He needed solitude to process this. I need to see to the horses, he stammered, turning toward the sanctuary of the barn. The familiar smells of hay and leather often soothed him, but today they offered little solace. He leaned against the rough-hewn planks of Samson's stall, watching the old stallion contentedly munch his feed. Madness, isn't it, boy? He murmured, receiving only a flick of an ear in response. Seeing things. Imagining things. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing the image of Violet's, Lily's eyes to dissipate. But they remained emblazoned on the darkness behind his lids, vivid and inescapable. He remembered the doctor's words after Lily's death about the bizarre forms grief could assume, hallucinations, phantom aches, warped recollections. Yet, this wasn't a transient illusion. This was tangible, undeniably real, and staring him down. His thoughts drifted back to Sarah, to the guarded fortitude in her stance, the lines of fatigue framing her eyes. She had made no reference to Lily, offered no indication of recognition. Was it possible she was oblivious to the similarity? Or was she deliberately concealing something? Suspicion, a frigid and unwelcome intruder, began to constrict his chest. He suppressed it, reminding himself that Sarah had come to redemption, trusting him with her daughters. He couldn't permit his bereavement to cloud his judgment. He required answers. He needed to fathom how two young girls, born years after Lily's passing, could possess eyes that were such immaculate echoes of her own. The truth, he suspected, resided in the past, obscured by layers of grief and unasked questions. And he was resolved to unearth it regardless of the personal cost. A widow's tale. The kerosene lamp splashed the kitchen table with elongated shadows, staining the aged wood with shades of honey and sepia. Sarah's apple pie, perched on the sill to cool, perfumed the air, a comforting fragrance that struggled against the growing disquiet. Caleb hadn't touched a bite. You inquired about my history, Sarah began, her voice a fragile thread. She worried her wedding band, a nervous tick that spun the silver circle endlessly. It's not a tale I relish recounting, Caleb. He inclined forward, bracing himself on the table. I'm no stranger to shadowed corners, Sarah. I've seen darkness aplenty. His tone was gentle, earnest, a plea for understanding. He needed to know. She inhaled deeply, the spiced apple scent momentarily fortifying her. Thomas, my husband, he was a good man. A farmer. Worked until his hands were raw and bleeding. A meager plot in Ohio. Humble, but ours. Then the fever descended. Her voice faltered, requiring a moment to regroup. It raged through the town like an inferno. Claimed him in 3 days. Abandoned me, abandoned us, a glance toward the doorway where Violet and Daisy were, supposedly, slumbering. Caleb remained quiet, respecting her need for solace. He pictured her, young and widowed, facing grief's raw edges, the daunting task of raising two small daughters alone. A pang of empathy constricted his chest. I persevered, she continued, a newfound strength lacing her words. Attempted to salvage the farm. Sowed, reaped, traded. But I lacked the strength. The bank seized everything. Our livelihood vanished. She met Caleb's gaze, her eyes mirroring Lily's, filled with a familiar ache. I sewed seams, scrubbed laundry, anything to provide. But the earnings never sufficed. The winters were merciless and the girls perpetually hungry. A shaky breath punctuated her sentence. I encountered an advertisement. A wife by mail. Redemption, Montana. A rancher seeking companionship, a mother for his child. She averted her eyes, a blush creeping up her neck. I know what conclusions you might draw. Desperate. Calculating. Caleb reached for her hand, his covering hers. Her skin was both delicate and rough-hewn. I don't presume that, Sarah. Her surprise was palpable. I believe you acted to shield your daughters. No man could condemn such a choice. His words were rough-edged, but his look was tender. He understood helplessness, the desperation born of insurmountable odds. I hated being a liability, she whispered. Hated relying on charity. But I couldn't bear to witness my girls wither away. She squeezed his hand, her grip unexpectedly firm. Your letters. Caleb, they seemed honest. Honorable. I prayed my judgment wasn't flawed. Caleb's throat constricted. He hadn't fully grasped the gravity of her decision, the sheer courage it demanded. He'd been lost in his own sorrow, his own isolation, oblivious to the burdens she carried on that train. And Violet. Daisy, they deserve a prosperous existence. A secure haven. A father. Her voice cracked on the final word. He recoiled, withdrawing his hand, suddenly ill at ease. They're fine girls, Sarah. Bright. Resilient. He cleared his throat. They remind me of someone. He refrained from elaborating, fearing the mention of Lily's name. The haunting image of those blue eyes remained too vivid. The silence thickened, punctuated by the grandfather clock's measured ticking from the hall. Finally, Caleb broke the quiet. Thank you for sharing this, Sarah. Your candor is appreciated. He rose, the chair scraping against the floor. It's late. Time to check on the livestock. He headed for the door, then hesitated, turning back to her. Sarah? Yes, Caleb? You made the correct choice. The words felt clumsy, inadequate, yet truthful. He couldn't predict the future, but he knew with sudden clarity that he was no longer solitary. Neither were Violet and Daisy. He left her there, bathed in the lamp's golden aura, and stepped into the cool night air. The heavens were a tapestry of stars, strewn across the velvet sky like scattered jewels. He inhaled deeply, the sharp sense of pine and sage invigorating him. He still had a long journey ahead, but a fragile ember of hope flickered within him. Whispers of the past. The morning sun, a pale imitation of the summer's blaze, cast long shadows across Caleb's study. Dust motes danced in the golden light as he pulled down a heavy, leather-bound volume. Genealogies of the Eastern families. The faded gold lettering proclaimed. He'd sent away for it months ago, a whim born of an idle curiosity about the woman he'd pledged to marry. Now it felt like something more. He'd spent the early hours tending to the livestock, the rhythmic chores a familiar balm to his restless thoughts. Sarah's revelation last night had settled something within him, a quiet understanding of the sacrifices she'd made. But it had also stirred a disquiet, a need to know more, to understand the roots from which Lily had sprung. He traced Lily's lineage back through generations of walkers, a solid line of farmers and merchants, mostly centered around upstate New York. Births, marriages, deaths, the dry facts of lives lived and gone. Then a small anomaly. Under the record of Lily's great-grandmother, Eliza Walker, a note scrawled in faded ink, Sister, Elara, estranged. Said to have twins. Twins. The word echoed in the quiet room. He ran a calloused finger over the ink, the paper brittle beneath his touch. Estranged. What had caused the rift? And what had become of Elara and her twins? He spent the rest of the morning poring over the genealogy, cross-referencing names and dates, searching for any trace of Elara. Finally, in a separate appendix dedicated to lost branches, he found it. A brief entry, Elara Walker married Silas Blackwood, unconfirmed relation, relocated west, possibly to Montana Territory. Issue, 2 daughters, names unknown. Blackwood. His own name. The coincidence sent a jolt through him. He felt a strange pull. The afternoon found him in the small, sparsely furnished schoolhouse, ostensibly helping the twins with their reading. Daisy, ever the eager student, was sounding out words with gusto. Violet, quieter as always, sat beside her, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Very good, Daisy," Caleb said, his voice gruff but encouraging. "Now, Violet, your turn." Violet hesitated, then pointed to a word on the page. "A&D," she whispered. "And," Caleb confirmed. Suddenly, Daisy giggled, a bright, tinkling sound. Violet makes the same face Lily does when she's trying to remember something. Caleb's gaze sharpened. He watched Violet, truly watched her as she struggled with the next word. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but there it was, the slight tilt of her head, the way her lips pursed in concentration, the faint furrow in her brow, all Lily. He'd seen those expressions 1,000 times in the past weeks. Later that evening, as Sarah was preparing supper, Caleb watched the twins playing in the yard. Daisy was chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing through the air. Violet sat on the porch swing, humming a tuneless melody, her fingers tracing patterns in the worn wood. He noticed Daisy trip, scraping her knee. She let out a wail, instantly mirrored by Violet, who hadn't even seen the fall. Violet started crying as if she was the one who had scraped her knee. Sarah rushed to Daisy's side, comforting her. Caleb remained on the porch, his gaze fixed on Violet. The empathy, the mirrored pain, it was more than just sisterly concern. It was something deeper, something connected. As Sarah cleaned Daisy's wound, he watched the twins. Daisy, though still sniffling, was already pointing at a ladybug crawling on a nearby flower, her attention diverted. Violet, however, continued to dab at her eyes, her lower lip trembling. He walked over to Violet and knelt beside her. "Are you all right, little one?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Violet looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with unshed tears. "My knee hurts," she whispered, even though it was Daisy who had fallen. He reached out and gently brushed a stray curl from her forehead. "It's all right, Violet. Daisy's knee is getting better. You're a good sister to worry about her." As he spoke, Violet's gaze locked onto his. For a fleeting moment, he saw something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, a depth of understanding that seemed far beyond her years. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the innocent gaze of a child. Caleb stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. The whispers of the past were growing louder, weaving a tangled web of family secrets and hidden connections. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that Lily's arrival and the arrival of her twins was no mere coincidence. Shadows arrive. The grit hadn't even resettled after the Ford's abrupt arrival. Before he was out, a predatory grin splitting his face. Silas Snake Granger. The name left a bitter residue on Sarah's tongue. He possessed a dangerous charm. His smile could thaw permafrost, yet a chilling ruthlessness always lurked beneath the surface. He wore a faded denim jacket over a black tee, jeans clinging too tightly, and scuffed boots that whispered tales of hard living. The swagger was undeniable. His gaze snagged on her instantly, framed by the porch of the Blackwood Ranch house where Daisy and Violet played a game of chase around the old oak. The smile broadened feral. Well, he drawled, his voice a honey threat that sailed across the yard. "If it isn't the little woman who got away." Sarah's pulse hammered a frantic rhythm. She drew the girls closer, fingers digging lightly into their shoulders. "Silas," she breathed, a mere exhalation. From the barn, Caleb emerged, wiping grime from his hands. He watched the unfolding drama, eyes hard, a tick jumping in his jaw. He hadn't met this man, but Menace spoke a universal language. Silas disregarded Caleb, fixated on Sarah and her daughters. "And these little blossoms," he purred, his voice layered with insincerity. He squatted, reaching a hand toward Daisy, who instinctively sought refuge behind Sarah's legs. Violet mirrored her sister, peeking out with wide, cautious eyes. "Come on, don't be scared. Your daddy's back." Ice water flooded Sarah's veins. "They are not your blossoms, Silas," she retorted, steel sharpening her voice. "And you were certainly not their father." A low, grating chuckle escaped him. "Now, Sarah, that's just unkind. We both know these two are mine. Especially Violet. She's got my eyes, plain as day." He punctuated the statement with a wink. Caleb advanced, the rag bunched in his fist. "What's all this about?" he inquired, his voice a low growl. Silas finally deigned to acknowledge him, dismissing Caleb with a careless wave. "Just a family matter, friend," he lied, charm oozing. "Here to retrieve my daughters." "These are my daughters," Sarah insisted, her voice wavering with contained fury. "You have no rights." "No rights?" Silas scoffed, a sound like nails dragging on a chalkboard. "I seem to recall a certain arrangement. And these two are the consequence." His gaze flicked to the twins, then back to Caleb. I appreciate the caretaking, friend, but Sarah and I have some catching up to do. And these little ones need their old man. Caleb's eyes became granite. He registered the fear etched on Sarah's face, the possessive way she held the girls. He was ignorant of their history, but he recognized a clear and present danger. He closed the distance, positioning himself between Sarah and Silas. "They're staying put," he stated, his voice clipped and resolute. Silas's carefully constructed affability crumbled, a flash of raw anger igniting in his eyes. "You misunderstand. This isn't your concern." "Anything that happens on my property is my concern," Caleb countered, his stare unwavering. Sensing the shift in atmosphere, Daisy began to sob, burying her face in the folds of Sarah's skirt. Violet, ever the echo, mirrored her sister's distress, tears brimming. Silas's eyes darted between the twins and Sarah. Calculation clouded his features. "Look, Sarah," he said, his tone softening, laced with false reason. "Let's not make a scene. Let's talk private." Sarah harbored no trust. She remembered what he was capable of. She sought Caleb's eyes, a silent plea passing between them. Caleb returned her gaze, his expression inscrutable. He was unaware of what Sarah had fled, but he wouldn't permit this man to abduct her or the girls. Not under his roof. "There's nothing to discuss," he declared, his voice unyielding. "You need to leave now." Silas's carefully cultivated patience evaporated. "You're playing a dangerous game, friend," he growled, his eyes narrowing into slits. "A very dangerous game." He lunged towards Sarah, hand outstretched. "Come on, Sarah. Time to go." Caleb blocked his path in a movable wall. "I said leave." The air thrummed with unspoken threats. The sun seemed to lose its warmth, stretching long, ominous shadows across the yard. The heavy scent of dust and an approaching storm permeated the atmosphere, a silent prophecy of the trouble that had just rolled into redemption. Confrontation. Dust devils danced around Caleb's boots as he positioned himself between Silas and Sarah, the afternoon sun flashing against his belt buckle's tarnished silver. A palpable tension gripped Redemption Square, thicker than humid air before a downpour. Mrs. Abernathy, laundry threatening to spill from her basket, and Hemlock, his knife stilled mid-carve on the porch, stood frozen, their gazes ping-ponging between the trio. Even the drone of flies seemed muted, cowed into silence. "He's not laying a hand on them, Sarah," Caleb declared, his voice even and deliberate, each word a carefully placed stone. He didn't glance at her. Her fear was a tangible thing, radiating like the heat off sun-baked clay. His focus remained on Silas and the cruel twist of his lips. Silas gave a dry, mirthless bark of laughter. "Well, ain't this a sight? The farmhand playing knight-errant." He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice that landed as a dark blot against the parched earth. "Move aside, Blackwood. This concerns family. Family matters are resolved behind closed doors, not paraded before onlookers," Caleb countered, his hand hovering near the Bowie knife sheathed at his thigh. A quiet warning, delivered with intent. "Onlookers?" Silas's gaze flickered to Daisy and Violet huddled behind Sarah, their young faces pinched with apprehension. "They carry my blood. Gives me certain privileges." "You have the privilege of leaving," Caleb stated, steel lacing his tone. "Before I encourage you." Silas's laughter boomed this time, echoing off the weathered, clapboard storefronts. "You? Encourage me? Boy, you've no clue what you're tangled in." He advanced a step, his eyes narrowing, the veneer of charm vanishing to reveal a predatory gleam. "Let's just say Sarah and I had understandings. Understandings about to mature into profit." A strangled sound escaped Sarah's lips. Caleb saw the blood drain from her face, her eyes widening with genuine alarm. He shifted, solidifying his position between her and Silas. "What understandings?" Caleb's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. Silas grinned, displaying teeth stained yellow. "Let's just say those little blossoms possess a talent certain parties would pay handsomely to observe. Parties willing to spend fortunes for a peek at the extraordinary." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a sibilant whisper barely audible over the sigh of the prairie wind. "They're more than just girls. They're gifted. And such gifts command quite the price." A surge of hot, primal anger coursed through Caleb. He didn't know what Silas meant, what talent he imagined they possessed, but the avarice in his gaze, the way he spoke of the girls as commodities, ignited a slow burn in his gut. "You're spinning yarns," Caleb accused, his words clipped and sharp. "Trying to frighten her." But a seed of doubt had already taken root. He remembered the uncanny way the girls sometimes seemed to share a single thought. Silas straightened, his grin widening into a leer. "Am I? Ask her." Ask her about the propositions we entertained. Ask her why she bolted. He waved a dismissive hand. She squirreled them away here in the boondocks, thinking she can protect them. But what's mine eventually returns. Caleb pivoted slightly, meeting Sarah's gaze. He saw the truth mirrored there, the confirmation of Silas's words in her terrified stare. Whatever Silas was hinting at, it held weight. There was a dimension to Sarah and her daughters he hadn't glimpsed. The townsfolk remained hushed, their faces a study in nervous anticipation. Mrs. Abernathy clutched her laundry tighter, and Hemlock's knife lay forgotten in his hand. All eyes were fixed, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Caleb turned back to Silas, his jaw clenched tight. Whatever scheme you've concocted, it ends here. Not on my watch. He clenched his fists, knuckles bone white. Leave them alone. Leave Sarah alone. Get back on that iron horse and never darken our doorstep again. Silas chuckled, a low growl in his throat. You believe you can stop me, Blackwood? You think you're strong enough? He took another step, his gaze locking onto Caleb's. This is far from over. Not by a long shot. He paused, then spat again, closer this time, a near miss to Caleb's boot. Enjoy your little fantasy, rancher boy. It's a fleeting illusion. With that, he turned and swaggered away, vanishing down the dusty street, leaving behind a miasma of unease and dread. A mother's strength. Sarah's stomach clenched as she met Silas's gaze, his expression a carefully constructed falsehood of wounded innocence. Venom, disguised as concern, dripped from his carefully chosen words, each a potential toxin aimed at her daughters, their very prospects. Planting herself like a sentinel before the twins, she stretched out her hands, warding him off. Don't believe him, girls, she managed, her voice betraying only a hint of tremor. He's twisting, he's not telling the whole story. Daisy, ever the more inquisitive, tugged at Sarah's dress. Mama, who is this man? He says he's our. Her voice trailed off, confusion knitting her brow. Violet, burrowing into Sarah's side, fixed Silas with wide, anxious eyes. That single gesture hardened Sarah's resolve. Silas would not lay a hand on them, would not warp their minds. Not while she could still draw breath. A grating chuckle escaped Silas's lips, a dry rasp that set Sarah's teeth on edge. But I am, my little blossoms. I'm the one who gifted you with those remarkable eyes, the kind that perceive the unseen. He reached for Daisy, only to find his wrist intercepted by Sarah's surprisingly steely grip. Stay away from them. The words were a low snarl, a far cry from the fear that had moments before constricted her chest. The apprehension lingered, but a fierce, protective fury now eclipsed it. Beside her, Caleb shifted, a silent bulwark of support. A fleeting look of gratitude passed between them. Silas's face contorted in a sneer. Still playing the martyr, Sarah? You can't bury the truth forever. These girls deserve to know their lineage, the potential they possess. He swept his hand, encompassing the dusty street, the gathering, gawking townsfolk. They're wasted here, in this provincial backwater. Ignoring the onlookers, Sarah knelt, bringing herself eye to eye with her daughters. Daisy, Violet, she said, her tone gentle yet firm. This man, he is not your father. Your father, he was a kind soul. He passed before you were born. I loved him dearly. Simple words, devoid of unnecessary embellishment. Now was a time for stark truth, not elaborate tales. Tears welled in Daisy's eyes. But, he said. Sarah framed her daughter's face with her hands. He's prevaricating, sweetheart. Trying to deceive you. He seeks something he has no right to. She turned to Violet, whose unwavering gaze remained fixed on Silas, radiating an unsettling focus. Both of you hear me. You are resilient. You are clever. And you are cherished. Never doubt that. Rising, her spine rigid, she confronted Silas. They are my daughters. Exclusively. You have no claim, no dominion over them. Whatever warped scheme festers in your mind, it ends now. Silas's smile evaporated, replaced by a frigid, assessing stare. You believe you can shield them, Sarah? From their own fate? From what they truly are. Their fate is theirs to sculpt, she countered, her voice unwavering. And I will fight to my last breath to prevent you, or anyone, from dictating it. She caught a glimpse of something akin to doubt flicker in his eyes, and her courage surged. He had underestimated her, mistaking her quiet demeanor for vulnerability. He presumed he could saunter back into their existence and claim what was never his. He was mistaken. They are not pawns to be manipulated, Sarah pressed on, her voice gaining in strength. They are children. They merit a life brimming with affection, joy, and security, not your manipulations and falsehoods. A murmur rippled through the crowd, their attention riveted by the drama unfolding before them. Caleb's hand rested on Sarah's shoulder, a silent offering of solidarity. Silas retreated a step, his eyes slits of suspicion. This isn't finished, Sarah. You can't keep them hidden indefinitely. Their gifts will attract attention. Eventually, someone will come searching for them. And when they do, you will be powerless to protect them. He spat on the ground, a gesture of pure disdain. Just remember, I presented you with a way out. A chance to make things easier. With that, he spun on his heel and vanished into the throng. Sarah stood, a tremor running through her, yet unbroken. The danger had not dissipated. She knew it in her bones. Silas's threat hung heavy like a suffocating blanket. But for this moment, at least, she had defended her daughters. She had stared down her fear and emerged, bruised but defiant, a mother prepared to wage war for her children's future. She knelt once more, drawing Daisy and Violet into a fierce embrace. It's all right, she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. Mama's here, and nothing will harm you. Redemption stand. The air crackled with a tension thicker than the summer humidity. Silas, his face a mask of frustrated fury, glared at Sarah, then shifted his gaze to the growing crowd gathering outside the mercantile. Caleb stood beside Sarah, his jaw tight, a silent promise of protection radiating from him. The twins, sensing the shift in atmosphere, clung to Sarah's legs, their emerald eyes wide and mirroring the anxiety of those around them. You can't hide them forever, Sarah, Silas hissed, his voice barely audible above the murmuring crowd. They belong with people like us. They belong with me, Sarah retorted, her voice ringing with a defiant strength that surprised even herself. And Caleb, they have a home here, a family. Something you wouldn't understand. Old Man Hemlock, his face etched with the wisdom of 70 years spent weathering redemption's storms, stepped forward. He leaned heavily on his gnarled cane, his eyes, though clouded with age, sharp with understanding. We know Sarah, Mr. Granger. She came here looking for a fresh start, a good life for those little girls. And we don't take kindly to folks stirring up trouble. Others followed Hemlock's lead. Martha Peterson, her apron still dusted with flour from her morning baking, spoke next. She's a good woman, Silas. Been helping out at the schoolhouse and always lending a hand. The blacksmith, a mountain of a man named Jedediah, flexed his calloused hands. Those girls are Caleb's. Plain as the nose on your face. Look at their eyes. Blackwood green. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Silas's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. He banked on fear and intimidation, on the insular nature of a small town. He hadn't anticipated their loyalty, their fierce protectiveness of their own. Caleb, usually a man of few words, surprised everyone. He stepped forward, his gaze locking with Silas's. You came here peddling lies, Granger? Trying to scare a woman and her children. That ain't welcome in redemption. He paused, his voice gaining strength. You claim to know about what those girls are. But you don't know a damn thing about love, about family, about protecting what's yours. Sarah placed a hand on Caleb's arm, a silent thank you. The twins, emboldened by the support, peeked out from behind her legs, their initial fear replaced with a cautious curiosity. Silas, realizing he was losing ground, tried a different tactic. He feigned innocence, a wounded expression replacing his earlier menace. I only wanted to see them safe. There are dangers out there, things you can't even imagine. They need to be trained, prepared. A young woman barely out of her teens scoffed. Trained? Prepared for what? To be used by the likes of you? She stepped out of the crowd, her voice surprisingly strong. We've seen your kind before, Silas Granger. Promising the world, delivering only heartache. The tide had turned. The townsfolk, once hesitant and unsure, now stood united. They were a patchwork of farmers, shopkeepers, and ranchers. But they were bound by a shared sense of community, a shared belief in fairness and justice. And they wouldn't let Silas Granger threaten one of their own. Time for you to leave, Granger, Hemlock said, his voice firm. And don't you ever come back. The crowd echoed his sentiment, a chorus of voices demanding Silas's departure. He looked around, his face contorted with rage and frustration. He knew when he was beaten. With a final, venomous glare at Sarah and Caleb, Silas turned and stalked towards his horse, tethered at the edge of town. He mounted quickly and spurred the animal into a gallop, disappearing in a cloud of dust. As the dust settled, a palpable sense of relief washed over the crowd. They turned to Sarah and Caleb, their faces filled with warmth and acceptance. Martha Peterson approached Sarah and took her hand. Don't you worry, dear. We'll look after you and those precious little ones. Caleb, still somewhat stunned by the outpouring of support, managed a small, hesitant smile. He looked at Sarah, then at the twins, a newfound sense of hope blossoming in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, they could build a life here, a real family. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Caleb sat on the porch with Sarah and the twins. The girls, exhausted from the day's events, were nestled between them, their soft breaths filling the air. "Thank you, Caleb," Sarah said softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "For everything." He wrapped his arm around her, a silent promise of protection. "We're in this together, Sarah. All of us." The air was still, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Redemption had spoken. And for now at least, it was their sanctuary. Second chances. The hush that descended after Silas's exit felt denser than usual, a suffocating blanket compared to Redemption's ordinary twilight. One by one, the townsfolk melted away, leaving Caleb, Sarah, and her daughters beside the post. Daisy, ever bold, grasped Caleb's hand. Violet, mirroring her sister's bravery, offered her own small, trusting hand. He gazed down at them, drawn to the bright expectancy in their eyes, a spark he'd long believed extinguished within himself. Kneeling, he met their gaze. "You girls all right?" Daisy nodded with fierce conviction. "We scared him off." Violet, more circumspect, added, "Mama was so brave." Sarah, visibly shaken, gently tucked a stray lock behind Violet's ear. I can't bear the thought of him near you." Caleb's eyes locked with Sarah's. He saw the raw fear battling with resolve there, the weariness battling protective love. He rose, enfolding Sarah in a tender embrace. "He won't be back. Not here." He meant it with his entire being. The community had made their stand. Redemption was their bulwark. Later, after settling the twins into the guest room, a space that now resonated less with emptiness, more with the promise of home, Caleb discovered Sarah on the porch. The night air, crisp and laced with the perfume of pine and damp soil, swirled around them. She stared at the celestial tapestry, lost in contemplation. He joined her on the swing, its gentle cadence a soothing counterpoint to the night. "They're asleep," she murmured, her voice a mere breath. "Good." He hesitated, seeking the right phrasing. Eloquence wasn't his forte, but he knew he had to try. "Sarah, I misjudged things." She turned, a question etched on her brow. "The girls. Everything." He raked a hand through his hair, an unusual display of unrest. "I was so consumed by what I'd lost, I failed to see what was blooming right in front of me. They aren't a replacement, Sarah. They're a renewal." A solitary tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. "Caleb." He framed her face, his thumbs tenderly wiping away the tear. "And you're a blessing I never dared to imagine." Seldom had he spoken so honestly, so unguardedly. The words felt inadequate, yet undeniably true. "I walled myself off from feeling, from loving. But you, in those two little dynamos, you've rekindled something within me. Proof that goodness still exists, that a future is still possible." He stood, drawing her up with him. He led her away from the porch into the open field behind the house. The star-studded heavens blazed above, a million points of light on black velvet. The atmosphere was expectant, hushed. Taking both her hands, he began, "I know I'm not an easy man to fathom. I'm rough-hewn and I carry more baggage than most. But Sarah, I've grown to love you. To love Daisy and Violet. You've breathed life back into this house, into this town, into me." He knelt, the cool earth a stark contrast against his skin. From his pocket, he retrieved a simple silver ring. Unadorned, save for tiny, etched wildflowers, it was all he possessed. "Sarah Walker, will you grant me the extraordinary gift of becoming my wife? Will you allow me to be a father to your daughters, and will you consent to forging a life together here in Redemption?" The silence stretched, thick with hope. Sarah's eyes shone, reflecting the starlight. He saw tears gathering again, this time born of pure joy. "Yes, Caleb," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He rose, sliding the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit. He pulled her close, enfolding her in his arms. They stood embraced beneath the vast, silent canopy of the sky. The burden of the past hadn't vanished entirely, but it felt diminished, endurable. They had each other, and they had redemption. They had a future to build. And for the first time in ages, Caleb felt a profound peace descend, a sense of belonging he thought forever lost. He was blessed with a second chance. A family forged. The starlight seemed to hold its breath as Sarah looked at Caleb, the wind whispering through the cottonwoods a silent chorus to the moment. His question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken years and a future suddenly bright with possibility. The silver of the makeshift ring, crafted from a horseshoe nail, caught the light, reflecting the earnest plea in his eyes. "Yes," she breathed, the word a fragile thing, easily lost to the night. But it wasn't. It resonated, filling the space between them, solidifying into a promise. "Yes, Caleb, I will marry you." A visible wave of relief washed over him, softening the harsh lines etched by sorrow. He reached for her, his hands, calloused from years of ranch work, surprisingly gentle as he cupped her face. He didn't say, "I love you" again. Instead, his gaze locked with hers, a silent vow passing between them, deeper and more profound than any spoken words. Daisy and Violet, who had been watching with wide, expectant eyes, squealed with delight, launching themselves at Sarah. "Mama's getting married!" Daisy shrieked, burying her face in Sarah's skirt. Violet, ever the more reserved, simply hugged her legs tightly, her eyes shining with unshed tears of happiness. Caleb knelt, drawing the girls into his embrace. They nestled against him, their small bodies fitting perfectly against his larger frame. He looked at them, really looked at them, not just as uncanny reminders of a past he tried to bury, but as his daughters, bright, curious, and full of life. A life he was suddenly desperate to protect. "We're a family," Violet whispered, her voice barely audible above the chirping crickets. "Yes, sweetheart," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The town, tentatively at first, began to emerge from its shell of fear. The threat of Silas, while still a dark cloud on the horizon, felt less immediate, lessened by the burgeoning hope that bloomed in Sarah and Caleb's newfound union. The townsfolk, starved for celebration, threw themselves into preparing for the wedding. Mrs. Abernathy, the baker, declared she would bake the finest cake Redemption had ever seen, and the women of the church gathered wildflowers to decorate the small chapel. Sarah, with the help of the townsfolk, transformed the small, neglected ranch house into a warm and inviting home. Daisy and Violet, their laughter echoing through the rooms, helped Sarah hang colorful quilts and arrange wildflowers in every corner. Caleb, never one for domesticity, found himself sanding furniture and repairing fences, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years filling him. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Sarah, dressed in a simple but elegant gown borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy, walked down the aisle, Daisy and Violet scattering rose petals before her. Caleb stood at the altar, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched Sarah approach, her face radiant with happiness, and knew he was the luckiest man alive. The ceremony was short and simple, officiated by the town's elderly preacher, a man who had seen his share of heartache and joy in redemption. When it came time for the vows, Caleb spoke from the heart, his voice steady and clear. "Sarah, I promise to love you and these girls, to protect you and to cherish you for all the days of my life." Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she replied, "Caleb, I promise to stand by your side, to be your partner, your friend, and your wife. To build a life together, filled with love, laughter, and hope." As they exchanged rings, a hush fell over the crowd. Then, as the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, a cheer erupted, shaking the small chapel. The celebration that followed lasted late into the night, filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Even the normally taciturn Caleb found himself swept up in the joy of the occasion, dancing with Sarah under the starlit sky. Life in Redemption settled into a comfortable rhythm. Caleb, with Sarah by his side, poured his energy into the ranch, expanding the cattle herd and planting new crops. Sarah, with her sharp mind and business acumen, helped Caleb manage the finances, ensuring the ranch thrived. The girls flourished, attending the local school and making friends with the other children in town. Redemption itself began to prosper. The renewed sense of hope that permeated the town attracted new settlers, bringing new skills and businesses. The schoolhouse was expanded and a new general store was opened. The town, once on the brink of collapse, was now vibrant and full of life. But even amidst the joy and prosperity, a shadow lingered. Sarah knew that Silas was still out there, waiting for his chance to strike. She refused to let fear consume her, but she remained vigilant, always watching, always protecting her family. She knew that their unique connection, the uncanny power held within Daisy and Violet's eyes, was the key to both their strength and their vulnerability, and she would do anything to keep them safe. One evening, as Sarah tucked the girls into bed, she noticed something different about their eyes. They seemed to glow with an inner light, a light that pulsed with an energy she couldn't explain. She brushed it off as a trick of the light, but a nagging feeling of unease settled in her stomach. She knew, deep down, that their journey was far from over. The family forged in love and resilience was about to face its greatest test yet.